All right, if you want to come closer to the front, the better. I know there's a few more that are coming in. If you want to come and get closer to the front, that'd be fantastic. And then we're almost done, so you should be excited. and I hope that you have taken those awesome conversations we had, the presenters, and the passion that they have for your future, especially. They're quite passionate about it, and they know, and we know, I know as well, that your potential is limitless. It's honestly, it's up to you. We want to make sure you have the right tools to do so, to get to that future. And again, like it was mentioned before, your future, it's super bright. That's what we wanted to, as we mentioned before on this screen. We wanted to spark your future. Make sure that you get that spark, and then you take it, because to be honest, the future is awesome. You'll see. So with that in mind, I wanted to introduce our last speaker and our concluding speaker. And her name is Angela Romero. She's the Utah House representative. And I'll tell you a little bit about her. Angela Romero has been a long life advocate for our community and a voice for the underrepresented. In her time at the Utah Legislature, Angela has kept fighting for affordable housing, a living wage, equitable education, and inclusion for all. Representative Angela Romero was the first elected to the Utah State Legislature in 2012 and was re-elected in 2020. Also, I wanted to mention that Angela was recently elected president-elect of the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislatures in the nation. So with that in mind, with that word welcome, we're going to welcome Angela to the podium.
Wow, I see so many tired faces. And I'm going to turn this more into a Q&A because I know when I go to a conference and I have to sit and listen to people talk at me for 6 hours, it's even though it's good information, I kind of zone out myself. So again, as he mentioned, my name is Angela Romero, and I'm in the Utah House of Representatives. I have these really fancy titles called Representative or the Honorable, depending on what's coming in the mail. But I'll just give you a little bit of background of who I am and why I was asked to speak today. So I was born and raised in a small town, used to be a small town called Tuella, Utah. Does anyone know where Tuella is? Anyone? Cool. My family is originally from New Mexico. People know New Mexico is part of the United States of America, correct? Because I get asked a lot of times where I'm from. And so the reason why I mention that is because my family has always been in what we call New Mexico prior to 1848 and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So I guess what I'm trying to say is when we look at the Latinx community, the Latina community, it's really important that we don't generalize people of color, because we all have our own unique histories. We all have our own identities, and so it's really important not to stereotype who belongs to our community and what they look like or where they're from. And I love that she's taking her selfies while I'm talking. So just so you know, I was raised by my grandparents. My parents weren't ready to take care of a child. And so my grandfather was a farmer because he had to help his family at the time, and he was the only son. And so he didn't even finish high school, even grade school. And my grandmother was the oldest of 12, and so she only went to the 8th grade. And so why I mention this is I'm the first in my family to go to college. But why I think it's important to mention is there was a point where my grandparents couldn't help me with my even grade school or my junior high or any school homework, and they didn't have the money to pay for a tutor for me. So when I graduated from high school, I didn't have a high GPA. I didn't have the best ACT score because I don't test well. I don't do well on multiple choice. I don't do well on multiple choice tests. And so when I was accepted to the University of Utah, I was accepted on a probationary period. So they wanted to see if I could excel before they took me on as a full student. And my first semester was really hard. I had a writing teacher told me maybe college wasn't for me because my writing skills were so poor. But I didn't let that distract me. And what really changed it for me in my college experience was I got involved with an organization called MECHA. Well, at the time it was called Chicano Student Union, and it later called MECHA, which was the Chicano Student organization. And that's how I got involved in community organizing and in my community. And so I was lucky enough to meet a gentleman by the name of Pete Suazo and another gentleman by the name of Archie Archuleta. And they saw this young woman who's about around your age, because I went to college when I was 17, because I'm a September baby. And they invested in me, even though a lot of people have stereotypes about our community. These two men invested in me because they saw the potential and they saw what I had to offer. And so I got involved with community organizing. I was the first student to be on the board of Utah Coalition of La Raza. And I also interned for Pete Suazo. He decided he wanted to run for office, and he served in the Utah House of Representatives. And I actually represent the neighborhood he was born into, but he ran for the House in Rose Park. And so he introduced me to public policy. And I really thought that, this was my track. But again, I got so involved in community organizing, I got so involved in student organizations that my grades were so-so. And I thought, well, maybe college isn't for me, so I dropped out. And in the process, I had my son, who's 25 now, and these two men wanted to make sure I went back to school. So they would say, hey, you ready to go back to school? I'm like, I'm not sure yet. I'm pregnant, ready to have a baby. And they kept on working with me. And I eventually went back to school when my son was 6 months, and I graduated with my undergrad degree. And I guess why I point this out is not everyone has the same track. And I hate when people say, well, if I did it, you can do it. I hate when people say, if I did it, you can do it, because that's not true. We all have different tracks in life, and for me, my undergrad took me 7 years, and I had a child, and I was not a teen mom. I was 23 when I had him, because a lot of times people like to stereotype me and think I'm a teen mom. And I knew I didn't want him to grow up in the same environment I did. Although my grandparents were very stable and they did everything they could for me, my mom and my dad had an interesting lifestyle, and it was very chaotic, and there was a lot of drugs, there was a lot of drinking, and I knew I didn't want that for my son. So that's why I went back to school. And I had these mentors, and so not everybody has the mentors that I did that kept opening that door for me. So when we're talking about equality is great, but we really need to talk about equity, because we can all be equal and have the same, quote unquote, the same rights, but that doesn't mean you're going to have access to those opportunities. And so that's where the equity plays a role. And so take advantage of programs like Gear Up and other programs if you're really wanting to come to the university, because programs like this I'm involved with in different programming is an opportunity and a way to access a university and access resources. And so for me, there are a lot of people like me who had my same hopes and my same dreams, but they didn't have access to programs like Gear Up, or they didn't have mentors, so they didn't have people there to open those doors for them. And so everyone can have dreams, but if you don't have someone who's there to open those doors for you and to keep them open, it's going to be really difficult to access. And I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but that's why I always like to use the term equity versus equality, because equality is important, but if we don't have that equity piece, we're going to continue to still see people left behind and people in the shadows. And so because of these relationships that I cultivated at the University of Utah, I was in graduate school, and I just knew graduate school wasn't for me. And I gave Archie a call, and he happened to be working for Mayor Rocky Anderson, and he was a mayor of Salt Lake City a long time ago. And they were looking for somebody to run their youth city government program, and so that person would be in charge of introducing young people to the political process, and they would be working on policy that impacted youth. And so Archie said, you should apply for this job. And so I applied. They had lots of people apply, but those individuals couldn't pass a writing test. And because of all those years, those 7 years in a gap in college, I was able to write a letter, and I'd worked in offices, so I got the job because most of the people that had interviewed for the job couldn't pass the mayor's writing test because he was a big stickler. And so that opened up doors for me, and I've worked for Salt Lake City Corporation, the city of Salt Lake, for 21 years. Most people don't stay with a job like that for as long as I have, but I love what I do. But I guess what I'm pointing out is because I had a background in public service, and because I worked in the mayor's office and then went to work in a community center, when David Livak, he was Representative Livak, he was the minority leader, decided not to seek re-election, I was asked to run for his seat. And I wasn't sure that's what I wanted to do, but I was talked into it again by a group of mentors, and I was elected to the Utah House of Representatives in 2012. So I've been in the legislature now for 10 years. I'm a Democrat. And so if you follow Utah politics, you know we're very rare up there on Capitol Hill here in Utah. And so, again, I was on the outside. And, I'm a Democrat, I'm a woman of color, and I'm not of the predominant religion. And so everyone told me, good luck, you're not going to be able to do much here. And this even came from people from my own caucus. And like I usually do, I said, watch me. And so for the past 10 years, I've been passing legislation on sexual assault, child sex abuse, domestic violence, human trafficking, preventative laws, and having conversations with people about things that they're uncomfortable talking about. And so my first big bill, I worked with Elizabeth Smart. How many people know who Elizabeth Smart is? If you've lived in Utah, or your parents live in Utah, you should know who she is. And so she helped me with my first bill. For those of you that don't know who she is, she was kidnapped, and they thought she was dead, and they found her almost a year later. And so she's a big advocate on child sex abuse because her kidnapper repeatedly raped her and did horrible things to her. And so she helped me pass my first bill, which was a child sex abuse preventive education. So now, if a school chooses to in Utah, they can offer that curriculum. Another bill I passed, and then I'll probably take it to Q&A because I can see I'm losing people, was HB 200, which mandates the testing of all sexual assault kits. And so for a long time in Utah and other states around the country, if somebody was sexually assaulted and they went and got a sexual assault kit, that kit would just sit on the shelves, and sometimes people just wouldn't pay attention to it. And so there were a lot of people who had been sexually assaulted, and many of you are probably related to someone who's been sexually assaulted or related to someone who's been a victim of child sex abuse. You might not know it because they've been too afraid to tell anyone because they don't feel like anyone will believe them. And so, again, people said, well, wow, that has a $2.4 million price tag on it, and you're a Democrat, I don't think you're going to be able to pass that bill. And through hard work and through coalition building, I guess this is what I'm talking about, is part of the things I do up there is majority of my colleagues don't agree with me, don't agree with my policies or my political stances, but they understand why I do the things I do because I care about humans, and these are more human rights that we should have. And so I was able to pass that bill, and so now Utah is one of 8 states in the entire country that no longer has a backlog, which is really huge and which is really critical. And then the last bill I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to take it all to you, is about 2 years ago, I passed a bill called the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Task Force, because, that's a good bill. There are a lot of young women, particularly young women of color, and two-spirited individuals who go missing or who are murdered and their cases are never solved or they're not on CNN. And so I wanted to bring a spotlight on that issue. And I was able to pass that bill, and I co-chair it now with Senator Hinkins, who is from the other side of the aisle. He's a Republican. And last session, we got $130,000 in funding to do some research here in Utah on where are the gaps in Utah and what can we do differently here as a state. And we just signed a contract with the Wilder Institute, which is Native-led, because Senator Hinkins and I know if we're going to be talking to our tribal communities and working with our tribal communities and working with our indigenous communities, we definitely have to have researchers that understand communities, because communities are all very different, and we wanted to be culturally sensitive to that, because a lot of times we may do things that might be offensive to other people, and we don't even realize we're being offensive. And so that is my big bill that we just passed, and we'll be working on this all summer. So I guess I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to definitely take some questions if people are interested in asking questions. But one of the reasons why I'm here is because a lot of times you don't see people who look like me in the state legislature. I'm very rare because of my political affiliation, because of my gender, and I'm not of the predominant religion. But because of all these lived experiences I've had, it's opened up many doors for me. And the reason why those doors opened is because I worked really, really hard. But I only didn't work hard. I had people like Gear Up and other programs that were there to help guide me through so that I could make it to the next opportunity in my life. And so without mentors, without people who have access to that power, it's a lot harder to get places. And so it's really important to find those people who are willing to look out for you and to help you get through those next doors, because you're not always going to get what you want. Like, I still don't always get what I want, and I learn from those experiences, but I don't let that define who I am. And so having those mentors are really important, because I can tell you, growing up, I was never involved in student government. It wasn't something I was interested in, because I didn't feel like I belonged. I always felt like I was on the outside looking in, because I grew up in a small town, and I wasn't of the predominant religion, and I was treated differently because of that, and because of my ethnicity. But those experiences made me who I am today, and that's why I advocate and I work for the things that I do. And I would have never thought I would be the president of the president-elect, and will be eventually president of the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislators. I wouldn't have dreamed that the First Lady of the United States of America, Jill Biden, would come to my district and meet with me and my constituents and some community organizations to talk about vaccines and do a vaccine clinic. And she went to Glendale Middle School and talked with teachers and talked with some of the students there. And of course, she left. I wouldn't have dreamed that I would have been to the White House twice this year, meeting with the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, and having a roundtable conversation with her when there's only 12 of us in her ceremonial office, talking about inflation, talking about what we're going to do with this country when it comes to health care and other rights that were taken away from women. And so I've been there twice in the Vice President's office, and the one thing that she asked us all to do, and there were only 8 of us there, was she made a pledge with us, and we made a pledge to her, that we would continue to organize in our communities, we would continue to organize in our districts, because like her, there weren't always seats at the table. And so she wanted to make sure that I, as an elected official, I, as a woman of color in a super red state, also had a seat at the table, and that's what I'm committed to do when it comes to my constituency. I represent a very diverse district. My district is the only minority-majority district in the state of Utah. 62% of the people in my district are from communities of color, the largest population of that being Latinx, Latino or Latina. And so, again, I would have never dreamed this. I would have never dreamed that the President of the United States would ask me to go to the signing of Taking Back Public Lands and the signing of Bear Ears and the National Monument Escalante. So I was there with our indigenous leaders, because I'm indigenous as well as Latina, seeing the signing of those lands being given back to the community. So that's basically my speech. Again, I'm Angela Romero, and I'm a first-generation college student, and I have a master's degree in public administration, and I represent House District 26, which will be House District 25, and I'm open for questions. I know it's really quiet, but I'm sure someone has a question.
And I have a question for Angela. So while I'm listening to Angela, I noticed that she mentioned several times about having a mentor and helping her along the way. So I was wondering if you can take 2 minutes to talk about the importance of having a mentor and how you cultivate that relationship.
Yeah, as I mentioned, my mentors were the late State Senator Pete Suazo, who died in an accident over, 25, 30 years ago, and a gentleman by the name of Archie Archuleta. And both of them were first-generation college students too, and so they wanted to make sure they opened those doors for people. But more importantly, although my grandmother didn't have a formal, I mean, she went to 8th grade. She was always probably my biggest mentor, my backbone, to make sure I went to college, because she didn't want me to have the same lived experiences she had. I mean, she was excited because she got a job because she didn't have a high school diploma, and she was hired for this corporation that didn't hire some of her friends that had a high school diploma. And so, again, it's about those mentors. It's about taking advantage of these situations where you have people who are here willing to help guide you. And I think it's always important to never let anyone limit you. And when people tell you you're this, and you know that's not who you are, you show them that that's not who you are. Because I can tell you, many times when I was in high school, and even in college, I had people that told me I wasn't ready for college, or I wasn't college material, because they had their own biases about who I was, because I'm a woman, and I'm a woman of color. And so those are my realities, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it for people. That's why equity is so important to me, and it's more important than the equality piece, because if you don't have those opportunities, you can be the smartest person in the world, but if you don't have people who are mentoring you and people providing you with those opportunities, you're going to continuously spin your wheels. And so that's why it's so important that people like me get back to our community, so we open doors for people, because just because I made it doesn't mean I'm going to shut that door on other people. I'm going to keep that door as open as I can. And so that's why mentorship is really important. And when I have young women and young men who intern for me, I continue to mentor them after they no longer are interns of mine, or they've went on to school. I just got a text from a few days ago from one of my former interns. Her name was Andrea. She was a non-traditional student. She went to Salt Lake Community College, then went to the U. She went on later to work for Ben McAdams. When he was a Salt Lake City mayor, she went with him to Congress, and now she got a job at the White House. And so I'm always happy when the students I work with exceed me, and they exceed me. So the mentorship is really important. So identify who that person is, identify who's going to mentor you, because those people are going to help you through with your victories, and also when you have those barriers, because those barriers will happen. I'm not going to say that it's not going to happen, and life isn't going to just be, it's always going to be positive, because you're going to have these challenges and you're going to have the barriers, and that's where your mentors fall into place.
All right, thanks so much. Any more questions? All right, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like programs, yeah, there are definitely a lot of community programs for just people in general, but specifically for communities of color. There's the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, which are the congressional members, and the Congressional Black Caucus, and there's even a Women's Caucus, and for different individuals. And so once you're in college, when you get to college, you can go through organizations where they'll give you the opportunity so that you can have those experiences. We also have interns here at a local level. And if you're really interested in policy, and it really depends on your city, like I oversee the youth council for Salt Lake City Corporation, so for people who live in Salt Lake City, and I always make sure that we have equal representation from the council districts, and those young people learn about policy and how to get involved and how to be civically engaged. But there's a lot of also nonprofits that do that as well. So if there's something specifically you're interested in, I'm more than willing to help you identify one of those organizations. So like if you're really passionate about the environment, there's Hill, Utah, and they have internship programs for high school students. Or if you're really interested in education, there's a variety of programs that are out there. But again, it's just having the right person to connect the dots. But definitely if someone wants to be an elected official, you don't have to actually run for school student body. You can get involved with your political party, and I don't encourage which one to be involved in, but you get involved with that, and then you can also be part of their, like, they have different groups like the Young Democrats, the Young Republicans, the Young Libertarians. So that's some ways in which you can get involved in those organizations to be part of the process. And there are a lot of people in Utah who have mixed status. So some people are aspiring still to be citizens, or some people are DACA, or because they were brought here by their families, because their families were looking for a better opportunity. You can't run for office, but that doesn't mean you still can't be involved. I have 2 interns right now working on my campaign, and 2 of them are DACA students, and so they can still get involved. They can be civically engaged. They just can't vote until their status changed. But so there are many opportunities to get involved now at your age. It's just finding the right organization.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, so you have more questions? All right, come on, Jose, come on up if you want.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I think there is an appetite in the Utah Legislature, but it just really depends, because we have to see what happens with this next election cycle, but also there's some work I'm doing at a national level as well to make opportunities happen. But until people stop fighting about the politics and really look at the policy and the people, we're still going to have some of those problems.
Thank you. So for sake of time, we're going to stop right here, because I know kids, you got to go back to your areas and then take your bus home. But I wanted to take a moment to give this to Angela as a present for spending just a little bit of time of her busy schedule with us, especially at this time of the year. We want to definitely thank her. So we want to give her an applause, please. Thanks so much. All right, so we're gonna, conclude this awesome Gear Up Day 2022, and we want to thank you for being here, for taking the time. I hope you can take advantage of all the resources and the ideas that we wanted to introduce you to, or help you see. And hopefully the idea is that once you digest all this information, that we get to spark your future. All right, thank you so much for coming here, and then make sure that you get home safely. Follow your leaders, make sure that they'll know where to go and what to do. So, and please be home safe. Thanks so much.